Good evening and welcome to the City of Dublin Planning and Zoning Commission. You can join the meeting in person at 5555 Perimeter Drive and also access the meeting via the live stream on the city's website. We welcome public participation, including public comments on cases. Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ms. Beal?
Ms. Harder? Here. Mr. Shinnock?
Here.
Mr. Veshman?
Here.
Mr. Supelek?
Here.
Mr. Way?
Here.
Mr. Snayer?
Here.
And Ms. Call will be a little late.
I need a motion potentially to accept the documents and approval of minutes from April 6th, 2023.
Motion to approve. Second.
Mr. Way?
Yes.
Ms. Harder? Yes. Mr. Supelek?
Yes.
Mr. Shinnock?
Yes.
Mr. Snayer?
Yes.
Mr. Veshman?
Yes.
The Planning and Zoning Commission is an advisory board to City Council when rezoning and platting of property are under consideration. In such cases, City Council receives recommendations from the Council. In other cases, the Commission has the final decision-making responsibility. Anyone who intends to address the Commission on any administrative cases must be sworn in. There are two cases eligible for consent agenda this evening. Case 2, State Bank, case number 22-010 PP preliminary plat, and case 3, State Bank, case number 22-011 FP final plat. Does anyone wish to have these cases removed from the consent agenda? The rules and regulations of the final plat and zoning commission state that no new agenda items are to be introduced after 10:30 p.m. Do we have to do anything more on the consent agenda? We're still to come?
You'll do a motion for that once you swear everybody in.
Perfect, thank you. Anyone intending to address the commission on any case this evening, please stand and raise your right hand and answer in the affirmative. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony to the commission? Thank you. Consent cases 2 and 3, State Bank at 4056-4080 West Dublin Granville Road. Case number 22-010 PP preliminary plat and 22-011 FP final plat.
You could just skip to the motion part.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. No worries. That's just in case.
That's what I was trying to digest
Yeah,
on the
yeah.
fly. We need a motion if it's still on the consent agenda, we need a motion to recommend approval for the preliminary plat with 4 conditions.
So moved. Second.
Ms. Beal?
Mr. Snayer?
Yes.
Mr. Supelek?
Yes.
Mr. Way?
Yes.
Ms. Harder? Yes. Mr. Shinnock?
Yes.
Mr. Veshman?
Yes.
And we need a motion to recommend approval up to City Council for the final plat.
So moved. Second.
Ms. Harder? Yes. Mr. Shinnock?
Yes.
Mr. Veshman?
Yes.
Mr. Snayer?
Yes.
Mr. Way?
Yes.
Mr. Supelek?
Yes. Consent case pass. Informal review, moving on to Fisher Homes at PID 273-012992 and 23-0301 NF informal review. This application is a request for a new development consisting of 55 residential townhomes on a 3.73 acre site zoned Bridge Street District, Sawmill Center neighborhood. The site is located southwest of the intersection of John Shields Parkway with Village Parkway. Mr. Hounshaw.
Great, thank you. Good evening. Before you tonight is an informal proposal for a new development going at the intersection of Village Parkway and John Shields Parkway. So shown on the screen is just the process to bring everyone up to speed with where we're currently at tonight. So with this being the informal review, you'll see that as the leftmost step here. This is an optional opportunity for all applicants to come before the commission, present a concept, an idea of what could be in the future, and receive preliminary feedback on and suggestions for things that could range anywhere from use on this to a site plan, architecture, or other details. So this is kind of the first preliminary step, and you'll see that there are 3 additional steps after this. So this application there's no determination being made tonight. This is the first of 4 steps. This would be required to come back to the board at minimum 2 to 3 more times. So this would certainly be before you again. So highlighted on the screen is the site. This is about 3.7 acres in size, zone Sawmill Center neighborhood. And you can see some of the primary adjacent properties here. You see Greystone Mews to the south, Toller Flats to the west. You see the Dublin Village Center off to the east, and then to the north, which isn't marked here, is Towns on the Parkway, which is a more recent development that's been approved. Shown on the screen are some existing conditions. You can see that the site is currently vacant. You see along the rear of both of these photos, that's the south side, is about 30 to 35 feet. That's considered a storm easement, but this includes a lot of mature vegetation and mature trees that kind of buffer Greystone Mews to the south. So the Bridge Street street network map outlines future and existing streets. To create more of a gridded system, that was the intent behind the Bridge Street District, was to implement something that would continually be laid out in the future. So you'll see a lot of major roads here, such as Toller Road, John Shields Parkway, and Village Parkway. So this site is located at the intersection of 2 district corridor connectors, but also principal frontage streets, John Shields Parkway and Village Parkway. The principal frontage street, that's a very important designation within this area. Streets that are designated with that PFS designation are required to have a significant amount of emphasis when designing that site, especially around open spaces and both architecture. So those are both key elements that will need to be included and considered when this project, or when a project does move forward with the site. So as stated, this is located in the Sawmill Center neighborhood. This is a special district that has additional set of criteria and rules that are listed in the code. You can see the map on the right identifies the location of this site. There are 2 elements which I'll speak to, which are specific to this neighborhood. But the intent here is to provide active mixed-use pedestrian-oriented development that interconnects between all sites to provide more pedestrian access. 2 of the key items that are shown at this site, one is an open space corridor. So you'll see it's on the south side of John Shields Parkway. It's the John Shields Greenway. This is an area that's owned by the city. It's not on this applicant's site. It's located between their site and John Shields. So this is a very important corridor that will be designed in the future by the city and will be developed out. Currently, it just sits as a greenway, but the plan is for that to be developed in the future. So any open space, any development on this site needs to interact with how that greenway is going to be developed in the future. And then additionally, at the intersection of the 2 major streets here is a gateway location. So this is listed as a point of identification. That's to separate this area from other areas of the city. So this can be done through different types of and different emphasis of architecture, different types of landscaping, but also public open space. So you'd see to the north, if you recall with Towns on the Parkway, they used open space and landscaping to meet that criteria. So back in June of last year, there was an approved concept plan that came before Planning and Zoning Commission. This is for a multifamily development with both apartment and townhome units. This was a different developer, so the applicant before you tonight is not affiliated with this proposal. But this is to at least provide you with a sense of what we've seen in the past. As stated, this was approved by the commission with a number of conditions There were also 2 waivers that were approved for the length of the block, as it does exceed what is allowed in the code, but that's also due to just the existing configuration of the site. And then vehicular access waivers. It would be anticipated that both of these waivers would be required should this move forward, as vehicular access is required to be off of John Shields Parkway and align with the one that's provided from the Towns on the Parkway product to the north. There were some concerns about this. A majority of them were around the apartment structure, as it was a 4.5-story building. This proposal was not showing any interaction of the gateway at the intersection, but also just a limited amount of open space and how it was engaging with the greenway to the north. So the proposal before you tonight is for 55 single-family townhome units on the 3.72 acre site. This comes in at about 14.8 units per acre, and they are proposing about 0.78 acres of open space on site. So the map just gives you an idea of the uses around and how this is currently laid out, but also the approved Towns on the Parkway layout. So you can see that the access points are coordinated, and that's something that would be required for this development. So the proposed buildings that are shown here are connected townhomes. You'll see anywhere up to 6 townhomes connected at once, and they are about 3 to 3.5 stories in height. You can see the centrally located access point onto the site. This would not be a public street. These would be access drives to access the rear of these townhomes, as they are rear fed with garages on the first level. Some of the site access you'll see here, which is highlighted in blue. There is a 2-way drive off to the west, which is the left of the screen. And then there's a single drive aisle loop off to the east, which does provide some angled parking as well. One thing before I dive deeper into access, you'll see that the buildings are all fronting on some sort of green open space. So the ones that are on the north, those are fronting on the greenway, and the buildings to the south, the front patio or front door is fronting out onto that 35-foot storm easement. So the intent of this is that all front doors are entering out into some sort of green or open space. So additionally, you'll see on the right of the screen, there's an emergency access which is proposed. This would not be paved. It would, as shown, would be a sort of specialty paver for emergency access only. Staff has provided some comments in the staff report expressing some of the concerns about this, just with the irregular nature between the 2 sides. There's also concerns from emergency services regarding the western half, as there's no way to turn around there. So site access is certainly something that will need to be continued to discuss. And then highlighted, it's in the faint green, you'll see the areas of open space here. So a key thing to consider with open space is that public open space is required with all developments, and it's required to be adjacent or adjoining with all public right-of-way. So anything that is not adjacent to John Shields Parkway or Village Parkway would technically not fall under public open space. So something to consider as this moves forward for recommendations on how the site lays out. And then finally, some of the key elements outlined with the neighborhood standards. So in the top right, you'll see the red circle. That shows where that gateway location is recommended to be. So currently the site plan does not engage with that, but I know the applicant is looking to speak towards that in their presentation. The green arrow shows the greenway, which is not on this property. It's just to the north of the property, but will need to be engaged with the design of this site. And then the 3 red arrows you see, those are all areas that would be considered terminal vistas. So terminal vista is prescribed in the code as areas where a street terminates or otherwise creates a terminal view at an open space or building. So this requires some additional emphasis in terms of how those are designed. A lot of times this can be done by wrapping the building to meet more head-on with these terminal vistas, but also finding other ways to just engage this site and how it's designed from all angles as you're coming to this. So just a few items to be considered. I did want to point out one thing, in that the site currently does not interact with Village Parkway. It does have that green space, but with that being principal frontage street, that's really important, and it's a key frontage here that needs to be designated, needs to be emphasized as this moves forward. And finally, the applicant did provide some architectural inspiration about what could be here in the future. You can see that 3 to 3.5 story building with the garages in the rear, all with front patio walkouts. Again, these are inspiration to be considered for what could be at this location. With that, we do have 4 questions before you tonight. The first is regarding the recommendations and requirements of the Sawmill Center neighborhood. So that's anywhere from the Terminal Vistas to the Gateway location to how the development interacts with the Greenway to the north. The second is regarding the proposed site layout. The third is regarding architecture, and then the fourth is about open space, where it's located and the types that they're providing. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, the applicant is also here to make a presentation. Thank you.
I think we'll do we want to do questions separately or wait? I'm asking separately. All right.
Do you do questions for staff now?
Yeah, question for staff.
So, quick question on the site access. You mentioned working with the applicant to improve the site access and turning radius. Like, that's a pretty significant change to this plan. What can you expand upon what you mean by working with further?
Sure. So we have provided these comments ahead of time to the applicant, so they're aware of these comments, understanding that with a lot of the recommendations for what to consider with this, that emergency access probably would go away. So that's another item that would change the site layout here. So at the moment, we've provided that feedback. They still wanted to move forward just to get comprehensive feedback so that they can take that and change that as they move forward.
And did they provide turning radius or anything, that information?
Not at this stage, no.
Thank you.
Mr. Way.
So I have several questions. I'll take off one by one. So Zach, what is the where it says trail connection on the plan to the south? It's got that dotted line around the trail. Is that a public open space, or what is that?
That is public open space. So that is it's owned by the city of Dublin. Yes.
Okay. And the nature of the 35-foot stormwater easement, what is that place? Is that meant for absorption of stormwater, or is it retention of stormwater?
I'll invite Heidi up to talk to that.
Thank you.
So that stormwater easement is to maintain an existing storm sewer that runs through there. It provides access from east of Village Parkway down John Shields Parkway.
So it's a utility easement, basically. Perfect. Thank you. And don't go down. So back to the access point. Is there ability to have any other access points from John Shields other than the one that's kind of across from the town?
I believe that is the access point that is wanted there.
So there's nowhere along the frontage could you introduce any other? Okay, perfect. I think we asked the question about access in the back, and you said there's been no turning radiuses, but does that meet fire? The east side of it, you said the west side obviously is a dead end, but does the east side loop meet a turning radius for a fire vehicle?
So with how it's currently provided, they would not, because they have that emergency access to get out of there and to get in.
So they can get out, so you don't have to get a vehicle back around. So
Correct.
it's in and out,
With how it's currently shown, that's correct.
But the west side doesn't have that same.
No.
Option.
So anytime there's a straightaway drive, anything longer than 150 feet, they're required to provide some sort of turning radius, whether it's a hammerhead or any other sort. So that measurement has not been provided at this stage, but it's safe to assume that that would need to be provided.
And I noticed the plan shows a number of pedestrian walkways across the open space corridor. Is there any kind of limitation to that, or number of crossings, or where they can occur?
Yes. So that is something that we have not had the opportunity to talk to yet. I'll just point to an example. Toller Flats off to the west. So because that is public greenway, it's very limited, the amount of interaction that you can, or I guess obstructions you can have through that. So they would need to reconsider, we would continue to work with them to minimize the amount of walkways that are cutting through there.
Okay. And I think I have one other, and that is I'm going to call it a driveway right now. The driveway that serves the Greystone Muse units, their garages, that's just a private drive also, right? There's no public nature to that. So they're fronting their units to the street with a private drive behind that then provides access to the garages.
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, a couple questions. So the stormwater easement is not included in their open space calculation?
The breakdown of it was not provided, so I would look to Amanda and her team to answer that.
Okay. And then the density, the current density in the Bridge Street district for this area, they're talking about 55 units. That meets the density, that doesn't exceed the density
So
limit?
sure, great question. With the intent of this district, it is to be more dense than you would see in other areas of the city. So to my recollection, there's no call of what a minimum or maximum here.
Okay.
To give you an idea, a range of what's around it, Towns on the Parkway was approved at about 13 to 14 units per acre. That's 154 units on 11.6 acres, and that's also townhome product. Toller Flats is an apartment complex that comes in at about 20 units per acre. It's about 420 units. And then Greystone Muse, which is duplex to the south, that comes in between 5 and 6 units per acre roughly.
And this is what again?
This is a townhome.
14?
This is about, I think it's about 14, between 14, 15. Yep.
And then I think if I read this correctly, in the staff report, somewhere there was a limit of 8 units per building.
That is correct. And that's specifically for attached townhomes. You can have no
Okay.
more than 8 on any building.
And they're at 6, so they're,
Correct.
okay, thank you.
Could you just clarify, is the trees and the vegetation staying, or have you had conversations about that?
Anything within that storm easement would be staying, which is where a majority of that mature vegetation is. It also does creep over that southern property line onto that public area too. And just to add as well to Lance's question, the previous proposal was about 175 units split between townhome and apartment. So that comes in about 47 units per acre. That's what that approved concept plan was for.
Can you, there's a plan showing the open space shaded. And can you just review that one last time? There was a comment in there, and I thought I heard that it may not qualify as open space unless it's on the John Shields side or the street frontage side, which might include also Village Parkway. Was there stipulations in there?
Yes, so stipulations for publicly accessible open space is that it needs to be contiguous with a boundary of public frontage. So anything along John Shields Parkway, touching that property line, and then Village Parkway, those could be areas that are considered for public open space. Currently, as it's shown, that Pocket Park would not meet those requirements. Understanding that open space is and how that's met, how that's programmed, usually not approved until at least the preliminary. But this is at least a great starting point of just understanding what needs to move on the site from the rear to be considered publicly accessible. I believe they're required to provide about a 1/4 acre of open space just based on the number of residents. So they're currently providing, based on what their calculations are, 3 times that. How much of it would count currently towards public and towards what's required in code? I don't have that number at the moment.
Got it. And again, the semantics there are adjacent public frontage. So I'm going to on the backside, that trailway that Mr. Way sort of touched on, that's public space. Open space adjacent to that, supplementing that, doesn't qualify.
That's a great point. We would need to look into that a little bit further. That development was also built in about 2004, 2005, so that predates any of what Bridge Street currently would allow or consider. But we can look into that and provide that at an upcoming meeting.
Got it. Thank you. Any additional questions? Hello, welcome. Hit the button. There you go.
There you go.
Name,
evening.
name and address.
Yes, my name is Amanda Webb. The address is 3940 Olympic Boulevard, Erlanger, Kentucky. I'm here tonight on behalf of Grand Communities and Fisher Homes. Go to the next slide. We're here, as staff discussed, to talk about the Teller property. You can go on to the next slide. Sorry. And skip that. I was just here a couple months back. We talked about who we were. So I think you all are familiar with Fisher Homes. We're out of Kentucky. We've been around for over 40 years. And we've been in the Columbus market since the early 2000s. So we are very close to the market and we are excited to be here in Dublin tonight. Next slide. Next slide. Try to make this quick. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I'm hoping for more discussion and feedback. So as staff mentioned, this is just kind of an overview of the site. We think this is a really great site. It's close to shopping. It's a great location. It's near the Sawmill Center neighborhood, and the zoning is perfect for our project. Go into the next slide. This is kind of the corner of the site. This is really the area where the gateway location is. So this is going to be an important slide later on. If you go to the next slide. This slide, I just kind of want to highlight, and I know staff discussed this as well. Our site is basically surrounded by the city property with the greenway on the north side and the additional trail and greenway on the south side. So I did want to highlight that because I think there was some mention in our staff report that we may be building into that greenway, and I just wanted to clarify we are not planning to do that. If you go to the next slide, please. This also kind of highlights those greenway areas. As staff mentioned, the site is about 3/4 of an acre. We are proposing 55 townhomes that will be fee simple townhomes. They're all accessed through the garage in the rear. So along John Shields Parkway and the trail in the back, you'll just see the front elevation of the building. You will not see the garage. One thing that, as staff had mentioned, we have discussed the layout and homes fronting on Village Parkway. So it's something I'm hoping we can get some feedback on as we go on to discuss that. I've also highlighted the gateway area on here, as well as we have some trail connections and quite a significant amount of walking paths throughout. The one constraint on the site, obviously with the shape of the site, the size of the site, getting that street through there and working through the roadway network. So that is a challenge that we are willing to work with staff on and work through with commission and staff input. Initially, when we came in, we did show a connection out to Village Parkway, and staff had asked us to remove that and kind of reconfigure the site. So we have did a couple different layouts and reconfigured it while working with staff. So you can go into the next slide. We can talk about our product a little bit more. It is a 3-story townhome accessed from the rear. These are really high quality finishes inside. They're customizable. as you'll see when we go down through a couple of the other slides, we can do massings of buildings. We can go up to 8 and we can reduce it down to like 3. You can go to the next slide. This is just a sample of the floor plan, one of the floor plans within. You'll see the lower level is the garage. It's where the garage is. And then there's some flex space on the first level. The second level, as you go up, you enter into your main living area. That area you'll find your living room, your dining room, and your kitchen. And then as you go up to the third level, that's where the bedrooms are. You'll find your owner's suite up there. And then there are 2 bedrooms or the option of, I apologize, doing like an office or something along those lines. This product is really geared towards empty nesters or sometimes even young professionals. So a lot of times what we're finding is that, people want to downsize. This is a low maintenance community. The property is maintained by the HOA, so you don't have a lot of the yard maintenance that you would have in a traditional single family home. So, they're downsizing, but still want an extra bedroom in case their children or grandchildren come to visit. So we are finding that seems to be a targeted demographic for this. These are some samples of our elevations. There's a modern farmhouse. The top right-hand corner is our contemporary. And then we also have the traditional American style. So just a few samples. We're willing to work with staff and commission on the elevation, hoping to get a little bit of input on that as well. This is just a couple samples of the interior. You'll see the living area, the kitchens are open, and as I mentioned before, they're customizable. So, your countertops, your cabinets, the fireplace, the style, all of that can be done by the homeowner when they come to look at the home. The community design portion, that's a really important thing for tonight. We're looking to do something that's purposeful. We want to make sure that this is interesting. Some of our areas that we'd like to discuss and go over are our gateway location, which is at the intersection of John Shields and Village. I think our initial thought was that we would try to mimic or at least complement what's going on across the street. Just want to get feedback if that's what you're looking for, if you're looking for something else. And we also had discussed with staff, we'll be required to do some bike racks and different things along those lines that weren't necessarily shown on this concept plan. Just full disclosure, the concept plan's very early on, so we don't have all of the detail that perhaps you'd like to see, but we just wanted to get some feedback before we got deep into that. If you go to the next slide. Okay, next slide. You can go into the next slide. Just wanted to leave this up there for a little bit of discussion, and if you have any questions for me, which I'm sure you do, and your feedback.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you.
Questions for the applicant?
Let me start. Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks, Jamie.
I guess I think the one of the biggest challenges in the room is obviously the access points and the tight site, and also the Village Parkway being principal frontage there. It seems like that really hasn't been addressed. I guess, what are your thoughts on how to make not only, I understand the gateway area, but the Village Parkway elevations a little bit more compelling?
So initially, our thought was with this layout that we have presented tonight, we intend to do high impact architecture, of course, along the sides for sure. We're hoping to really beef up our landscaping along Village Parkway. And at the time, we thought we were going to be required to do an emergency access, which is kind of why we left that open like that. After having conversations with staff, we can look at rotating the building so that there is frontage along Village Parkway as well. We're open to your feedback if that's what the board would like to see or what the city would like to see. We're definitely open to that.
And then the follow-up question, so along the greenway there, we talked about having some more green space adjacent to that. I assume you studied that and it just doesn't, with the depth of the site, it doesn't really work, or did you look into that?
As far as, can you repeat that?
Extending the green space, like the what we call usable green space or
Mhm.
meaningful green space would be along the city greenway there, which we just discussed.
On the John Shields
I'm
side.
sorry, yes, on the John Shield side.
I think our thought was to really pull those buildings up as close to the street as we can, just based on reading the Bridge Street District Code. We thought it'd be best to pull those buildings up. We do have some space where we can move those down. We have a little bit of flexibility on the site, as far as if we need to pull those down. We did show, we talked about this, several walkways or connections to, I think there's 4 or 5 up there, to John Shields. And in discussion with staff, we realize that's probably not going to be permitted. So if we need to pull those down, we could.
Okay.
And going back, I think, and maybe I didn't confirm this with staff to the degree I should have. My understanding was that trail on the south side was a public green space. So it was our understanding that stormwater easement would count towards our open space. However, I believe even without that, we still meet the open space. Of course, that's including the pocket park, but we can look at moving our open spaces around to meet the intent of the code.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Harder? Okay. Mr. Snare?
I appreciate the open space. Well, I'm going to do another thing first. There are no amenities for the residents in this proposal.
So the way that we looked at it, the amenity would be, one, the location and the walkways and trails, and also the pedestrian and the bike facilities. Probably, we'd imagine having like some benches around the park as well, some seating area.
No,
But
no clubhouse or anything.
no, sir.
So I'm just thinking aloud here, along Village Parkway, well, it's nice to have green space there because to the east of it is heavy commercial, the theater, et cetera. Have you given any thought to maybe doing something commercial on that frontage?
No, we have not considered commercial on here.
So you want to maintain it as a residential?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Fishman?
Yeah, I have a couple comments. I really think it's refreshing that you're doing kind of like architecture that's like single-family housing architecture in a multifamily, which is not common in Bridge Park. So I think that's real refreshing. My one concern is we had a lot of discussion actually last night about the usable open space.
Mhm.
How big is this little triangle here at the end? I couldn't find anything that had the dimensions of that.
That triangle right there, I apologize, I don't know the square footage off the top of my head. I would say probably the deepest part is about maybe 60 feet deep. I do know that when we looked at these, there's a code provision where it has to be, I believe, a minimum of 200 square feet. Is that correct?
Yeah, so,
I double check it against that, so I
sure.
can confirm that.
Yeah, so depending on the type of public open space, there are multiple to choose from in the code. So there are minimum size, width, length requirements. Just at this stage, that hasn't fully been contemplated, it's just to show potential locations at the moment.
I personally think that this project, and I was driving around there today, the project adjacent to it is pretty dense and buildings. And I can imagine years goes up there kind of like in a tunnel driving down the street there. I think that we need usable, you've got 55 units, and if that's 60 by whatever, it's really not very usable for that people. So if this one building, 5 units, was eliminated, and you had that as an entrance coming in, I think I would really be more positive about the project. Personally, I can't speak for anybody else, but but that would give you some real usable space where you don't have any now. If 25 of these 55 units want to gather and do something, there's not much room to do that. And
Sure.
so since this is kind of like a single family project bunched together, I think that I'd really feel strongly about eliminating that building and having that open space. Now, you can move it somewhere else, I don't care, but I think that you need a decent size of green space to serve those residents.
Thank you. I'm just taking some notes.
What?
I'm just taking notes.
Well, that's my input. I mean, I think that the architecture is fine. It looks like single-family architecture in it, which is, as I said, I think is refreshing, but without, all you've got is the city right away and so a little bit of green space, narrow green space, but you couldn't have a group of people doing something or a little concert there or anything. There's nothing that's usable, and I think if you eliminate that building, that would make me happy.
Okay. Thank you.
We'll have
What?
more time for comments in
Yeah, right.
in a moment as well.
That was my question.
Mr. Way?
Do that. Okay.
No comments? No, I don't know that I have questions at present for you either, Amanda. I appreciate your presentation. The previous time you were here, you did a lovely presentation. This time it's a good presentation. Kudos. And I think with that, we can get into public comments.
Thank you.
So there was a number of public comments which were sent to staff via email. Those were all included in your packet prior to the meeting. And again, I thought just for the sake of making sure that we're sharing the general sentiments of those that was conveyed to staff were related to the general development concerns, the open space or insufficiency of the open space, density and traffic, access and maneuverability, impacts on the surrounding area, as well as there was concerns about the connection for the walking path between the two developments. So that was the general sentiment of those comments, again, that were already provided in your packet. I did receive another one that did not make it in time for you to have ahead of the meeting, which I'm going to read aloud. And then there was someone that was signed up that I'm not sure if they're with the applicant team or from the residents, but then we can proceed from there. So the one I received this evening is from Diane Cardilano at 3390 Martin Road, Dublin, Ohio, 43017. Yikes. The density of this project seems a bit much, to say the least. At the March 2nd meeting, PZC disapproved a Fisher Home development of 53 units at Bright Road and Emerald Parkway on 18 acres. So it seems illogical that 53 acres would be approved for just 3.71 acres. These continued high-density projects in and around Bridge Park will add yet more traffic and continue to negatively impact Dublin's stated goals of making the area more walkable and pedestrian-friendly, Vision Principles 1 and 5, as well as further deteriorate what little green space is left in the area, thus contradicting Principle number 3 regarding Dublin's commitment to environmental preservation and sustainability. Furthermore, where in the world were guests, service vehicles, and emergency vehicles park? This is just too much for too little space. Thank you for hearing my concerns. And then on the digital sign-in, I had Robert Brooks as someone that was interested in speaking. So you can come to the podium.
Yes, please. If anyone's here to speak, feel free. Come on up to the mic, name and address. And I saw your hand as well back there.
Yes, my name is Robert Brooks. Address is 4246 Tuller Ridge Drive. And I'm a resident of the Greystone Mews community, which is adjacent to the proposed development. I just wanted to primarily express my opposition to the proposed connector, primarily for the security and privacy of the Greystone Mews residents, although, you could say residents on the other side might have the same concern about people coming that way. And I would also suggest that as the project or proposal goes forward, that you consider obviously not only eliminating the connector, but even establishing a little bit more of a stronger buffer zone between the two, meaning something like a fence that would preclude somebody from whomever that might be. I'm not really talking about residents now, but whomever that might be from kind of maneuvering their way between the two properties if they have something ill intent in mind. And just to discourage that traversing between the two properties, just to kind of keep them, you know, sort of as individual private properties as they are right now. And I think that's really that was my primary concern is to express that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Sorry about my appearance. I dressed a little casual. Anyway, my name's Phil Beckwith. I live at 6739 Cooperstone Drive. That's in Greystone Mews. I want to say on the positive side, I really enjoy living in that area. The bridge project is beautiful. It's fun. It's vibrant. I enjoy every bit of it, and I don't mind the development. Greystone Mews is in the middle of development, and again, it adds to the energy, and I enjoy very much living there. I'm going to echo the sentiments, though, that I've heard in some of the other comments that that as the bridge project develops and becomes more and more dense with housing, little by little, anything that resembles open air green space begins to disappear, and the whole sort of urban concept becomes a parody of itself, I think. And so I would oppose development that took away an excessive amount of what I'm going to call usable open green space. As I say, if I have a criticism to make, and I have very few, it's the disappearance of greenery in this area. And that's my comment. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public care to speak? Seeing none. Move on to deliberations. Anyone set to go? Jamie? Thanks, Jamie.
I can start. So we're just some general feedback comments, I guess, at this point in the conversation or the meeting. I guess the first point I'd like to make it, and I think you got the message on green space. It's obviously a concern, and I don't necessarily know that we need to belabor that any further. But I guess when you look at the overall site, the question, comes up again is, does it fit? We've talked about density, we've talked about the overall layout, accessibility, and everything else. So I would just maybe rethink that a little bit, and just is it scaled appropriately for the site when we talk about all these other factors that fit in. And then we've also discussed the Village Parkway views. I think the connection to the theater area and what's happening there, the gateway, that's very important. It's again, Village Parkway as development moves is going to be a prime view, prime elevation. So I think we need to pay a lot more attention to that. It kind of feels a little bit like it's an afterthought here. Other point on the architecture, I guess I would maybe not fully agree with Mr. Fishman's comments. I personally think the architecture doesn't really fit. It looks like it's something that was probably in one of your catalogs, one of your standards. So I would try a little harder. Again, with the materials, the feel of the area, I think it looks a little bit forced personally. So I think maybe we can challenge that a little bit and have a little more of the Bridge Street character, the character of the area, and have it fit a little bit better, as opposed to something that's probably, I'm sure you replicate it in other areas, which is, again, understood, but I think we need to just kind of consider that a little bit further as it relates to Bridge Street. And the last thing I'll say, I do like the idea of the mixed use that was brought up. I think that could help. Again, the whole spirit of the area, the whole spirit of Bridge Street is about the mixed use, bringing a little bit of amenities on the site, kind of spreading it out a little bit more. And I think that helps just I think someone mentioned the active, making the area more active. So green space plus some other amenities for the residents, I think would be nice to have here as well. And I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. Ms. Harder?
Thank you for being here, and I appreciate the public comment as well, too. And also, thank you for referring to them as homeowners. I think that's a great opportunity for that area. I'm, talking about the area and so forth. When I think of the space, again, and not to repeat, but it is such an important area that you got to think around the whole dimensions of it, what is to come and what is already there. And to do that, it's a pause, it's a look, it's a feel, it's a walking through it. It's walking into the neighborhood behind it and getting the feel over there, because they've really spent a lot of time becoming a neighborhood, and you can really feel that in there, and what that walkway is like and how they would come out to your area and what that would be like. Maybe getting rid of that corridor part would be that transfer area might be helpful. Also, thinking about a little bit more green space and figuring out how to do that. And then when I think of the architecture, I think it has a busyness to it. I think you got to look around the area that you are and say to yourself, I see elements of wrought iron, I see steps, I see interactiveness to other areas. I see even the window trims have a different feel to it than other areas. I don't think it hits me as like a farmhouse type of environment, but has some of those elements where bringing in more of that brick tones, and you can incorporate, not another color, but, different tones to it, but could soften it a bit there too. The height's important to me. It's a townhome, and I think that is usable space for that. I'd like to hear more about where you would put the, if there's a balcony on the back, what would happen, and what are they looking at, or is someone looking back at them, and what that piece is there too. Let me just pause for a second. The roof lines to me were a bit too hard for the spacing and so forth. And I talked about that. Just look at this one more time. So I think that really kind of hits that overall appearance of it, just that it's not as busy. It has more of a continuation. The biggest thing is that we want people to keep going to the other businesses across the street and connecting, and that this isn't a stop place there too. And really about the neighborhood behind to take particular interest. Thank you.
Mr. Wang?
So again, thanks for coming for an informal review. I think it's always good to have a dialogue. This site is really interesting because it kind of sits between the denser part of Bridge Park and what is evolving in the future with Dublin Center, which we don't know what that is yet, but we know that it's going to evolve. So you've got potentially denser development on two ends, and then you've got this more attached single-family environment in between. And so I think from a use standpoint, I think you're on the right track. Although, I like density, but I think this being a transitional site between the towns on the Parkway and Greystown Mews, I think you're in the right transitional kind of product type. I would like to see that transition in terms of thinking about the architecture, in terms of it being in between. How can you borrow from both of those projects and make something look like it's fitting into a neighborhood? The thing that I really struggle with, and we're starting to see it in other parts of the city and other proposals, is building housing off of a street and connecting it to the street with a walkway. I think your approach to having rear garages and all that's great, but I would want to see every unit be on a street or some kind of a fronting driveway. Just like Greystown Mews has got a public street and then it's got a private drive behind which access the garages. Obviously, this is a very tight site, and you said you looked at a lot of different options. I don't know what those were, but at a basic, if you could get another drive or street that came in on the south side that provided a drive out the front door to all these units, that would make me start to feel more comfortable. I really agree that Village Parkway needs to have fronting units, right? Just like John Shields Parkway. So I think you mentioned looking at turning units or facing units onto that. I think that's the first step. And then if you think about that, and if you think about your entry drive, what would happen if you turn those units so they face the entry drive? And so all of a sudden you're starting to create more units that are fronting onto streets. And then how do you solve access to the others is the challenge, right? So I don't know if you can fit another drive in on the south side up against the stormwater easement that would allow those units to front to a street. But I think the challenge is having a walkway that's, it's really long that you're walking in from Village Parkway or you're walking through the development to get there from John Shields. It just feels like those units they're nowhere. So if you turn, again, if you think about turning the units so they're perpendicular to John Shields, and maybe there's this repeat of front door, back door, maybe there's a muse with open space, and then again, I don't know if that all works out, but that's something that I think you should explore. Not comfortable with I don't know how many feet it is, walkway that doesn't have any kind of other kind of public access to it. So we've seen this in some other developments. We've given the same kind of feedback. I think there's a length that you can get away with, and it's probably one of your unit blocks is probably as far off of a street that you can get with a walkway without having some other street connection. So again, I think I don't have a problem with the townhouse environment. I like the rear garages. I like the way you fronted to John Shields Parkway and the open space corridor. I think that whole edge, makes sense to me. It's this edge on the south side that I'm most uncomfortable with. And I think, again, you might explore turning the units so they're perpendicular to John Shields, and maybe there's an answer in that. But that would solve the problem of this long walkway that you're walking in from a public street. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wade. Mr. Fishman?
Yeah, I agree with everything my colleague said. But I still think there's a need for more green space. It's something that was a conversation. We had a joint meeting with council. We had several conversations about it, and the key word was usable green space. I think that one way to solve all these problems is to have a few less units, and that probably doesn't get you really enthusiastic, but I think that would make it a much more lovely project. I don't mind I like the elevations, even though they are probably elevations you've used other places, but I think it's more of a single family looking elevation that's not seen much in Bridge Park, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. We have a library downtown that looks nothing like the rest of downtown, but a lot of people love it, so I don't think that's a problem. But I think these little tiny pieces of green space aren't going to cut it with me. So that's my only comment.
Mr. Schneer?
I'll start with the architecture. I think the architecture is fine, and fine meaning good. I agree with Mr. Fishman. I think it fits in well, and I like the single family sort of concept about it. I'm having problems with everything else, and I think it was Gandhi who said, life is a series of compromises. So we've got density, driving and parking, green space, and ultimately price. And I'll turn it around, and one of the things I think we should be looking for are opportunities to create affordable housing. I don't know if this everybody has a different definition of affordable, and this may not fit that definition, but if the density is reduced, then all other things being equal, it probably becomes less affordable. It has to come out of somewhere. So I'm torn between those different elements. We all want to see more green space, but at what cost? And I guess I sort of use cost in the literal and figurative way. So I'm, as I said, I'm struggling with reconciling the density and the green space on such a small area. And I don't have an answer, because I look at the green space on Village Parkway and think that that's not, it's great that there's green space there, but that doesn't look like what should be on Village Parkway. So in my view, there should be something else there. Maybe it's maybe it's one of your buildings, maybe it's a small commercial strip or clubhouse or whatever to provide more interest as you transition from your project to to the Village Parkway. So I apologize for not being able to provide you with concrete suggestions other than saying I do like the project and I'm fine with the density, but I echo everyone else who would like to see more green space. I don't know how you get more green, it's finite. You've got a finite, we all have, all applications have a finite area, and you're just trying to wrestle with a couple of those different variables. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. First, Diane, Phil, Robert, thank you for speaking, and everyone else who emailed in. Amanda, I think everybody, I'm going to echo everybody here, right? And I don't know that it's not necessarily even the nature of your layout as much as this site is a struggle, right? It's challenging in a wide variety of ways. There's comfort in certain edges, which make a whole lot of sense, right? Intuitively, everything that's occurring on John Shields kind of has the right feel. Obviously, it's like a Twizzler at the end, and it just chops, and everyone can look straight down the tunnel on the Village Parkway, and that's leaving something to be desired. We do like even across the street they had a similar scaled building, but we were kind of hard and careful about, I'm going to say, corners and ends and vistas, and so it wasn't this townhome, and then just a truncated building. There was more thought to that. So that's loud and clear. The backside, Mr. Way touched on it in particular. There's merit to what you're setting up on the John Shields side. The backside, I wrote it verbatim. Will anybody go to those front doors ever? Would we? Right, and we've seen, to his commentary, we've seen it where we pull the front door away from the street, and there's a big swath of space there, and so. This is not the first time we've asked that question, and in which case does everything fundamentally change, and are we creating something that's sort of, I think your words, no man's land, right? And I don't pretend to know, much like Mr. Snare, I don't pretend to know the answer, but I think we're clearly saying it's not there, right? And there's work to do here. We, of course, and I think it was Mr. Brooks commented on green space, right? This is right now a lovely field. We, of course, can't stop landowners from, their property rights. We can't stop landowners from developing. We strive essentially to help it be done well. And part of it is the protocol around certain things like the pocket parks, like the open space, so that even when something gets developed, even down to high density in Bridge Park, there is potentially an adequate dose of our Dublin green space that continues to exist, right? And the proximity and location of all those are important. If it's something that's buried in a way from people, away from the public, we don't experience it, right? If it is highly visible, proximity and access matters relative to those touch points, right? Those are the sort of aspects that are driving our code and nature around that. It's the same thing. I hate to say it. It's the bicentennial. I'm going OMA preservation. The bicentennial barns we all know and love. They place them off the highway. They paint them off the highway so we see them and experience them. Right at some point when those were all done. Because, doing that off on a rural road that nobody drives down is a problem, right? So there's a lot to that, which is all to say, even that, the ingredients, we're cooking with the ingredients here, and the pocket park and the open space and all that stuff is one of those ingredients, but it's not cooked in well. And that, again, could be relative to the layout, could be relative to the problem down on the Village Parkway, could be the unfortunate thing. I think we had some hunger for, and it's not the first time we've had hunger for, this site could really use a second access point. The access point that you have is right, but where potentially is another one, and of course there's no good option for that because it's not Village Parkway. If anything, it would be the other end, and that seems daunting and problematic relative to the city green space as well. I do, relative to specific comments on use. Yes, I'm good with residential use in this area. Again, there's commercial ends to this district that are starting to blossom and residential between, right? It's just a matter, these residential areas continue to come, and it's just a matter of time before there's a grocery store right on the other side of Village Parkway, right? It tends to be how it goes. Site layout is worrisome for the variety of reasons we touched on. Architecture, I'll say this, the sort of commentary of something out of the book, that at this stage, that's a lot of times what occurs. We know that, that. I will say this about what I do see here, whether it's stylistically any of I think the three you submitted, what I do applaud is it's not flat, right? There is a lot of push and pull on those facades. So it breaks it down quite a bit. And a lot of times that's the danger of, right, some of these multifamily buildings, that they're very, very flat and, it's kind of lackluster in that regard. What you have has a lot of movement to it. Again, to the Ms. Harder's commentary, stylistically, could they be better tailored to this location and kind of draw from Greystone and potentially draw from across the street? Maybe. That might affect the palette and the materiality and affect how the shape of the roof line comes to fruition. But I will say the push and pull is already there. So I think even that consideration and consideration of the material palette, I think starts to be potentially an agreeable product for what it is. I think I might have covered all of mine. It's hard sometimes to tell relative to the notes. Yes. So with that, any additional comments? Deliberation? Do you have, yes.
I appreciate all of your comments and your feedback. This is a tricky site, so all of the feedback that we can get is very appreciative. One thing about the south side of the site, we did actually look at some perpendicular rows of homes initially, but I think staff had kind of pushed back on that a little bit. So I did want to throw something out here. I just curious, would you be opposed, or is there any thought? We have a front-loaded product on that south side, so then the fronts would be on that private street. Is that something that commission would entertain? It's a very similar product and it's complementary of our rear loaded. So John Shields would all be fronting, they would be rear loaded, Village Parkway would have rear loaded, and then we would tuck our front loaded back in that vicinity. I'm not sure if that would help or answer any of the questions, or maybe I just threw another wrench into the game.
I think it's, again, it's the mixture. I mean, I think the notion that you're doing here makes perfect sense. It just needs a street on the other side to really like nail it, right? And obviously that's a challenge. I think starting to mix between front loaded and rear loaded, to me, creates a kind of a schizophrenic kind of feel for a neighborhood. I don't know what it would look like. Maybe you want to explore it and share it, but I would be challenged with that mix.
I agree. I think the rear load concept is, we're trying throughout the city to avoid the pull up to your garage sort of look. So that was one of the things that struck me as a positive.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you.
So that takes us through our cases this evening. Communications.
I just have two quick ones. One is a thank you to everyone that was able to participate in the joint work session and or come to the public meeting that we had on Tuesday. Both were very successful, and appreciate the input and feedback from the commission members, as well as anyone from the public that was here as well. So we'll be providing follow-up minutes and things like that, so people can understand that we're not able to come, can understand the conversation and what was where we landed on some of our issues that were identified. There are going to be plenty of other opportunities going forward to be part of the conversation for that. And then my only other announcement is our next meeting was supposed to be scheduled for May the 4th. We don't have any cases that are ready for that agenda, so we'll be canceling that meeting. I know, so free evening for you all, for many of you that had.
Some of us are still coming in.
Okay. Anyway, you can just come hang out if you're bored. So anyway, so that's all I have.
Probably. Relative to just a brief overview of maybe the skeleton of this group's participation relative to the adjustment on the city plan,
The community plan?
community plan.
Yeah. Yes. Like talk through what we did. Is that what
Yeah.
you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, so for those that were not able to attend, we worked with the consultant. They led the Planning Commission, City Council, and Architecture Review Board through an exercise to identify their top 5 issues or concerns that they had related to the city. So everyone went around and shared what those all were until the list was exhausted. So if there was repeats, you didn't repeat what somebody else said. You just kept adding until everything was accurately represented. And then everyone was asked to then, once these were all written down and then displayed in front of everyone, asked to then highlight what their top 3 individually were. And so then we just voted. Well, I guess staff didn't. The members that were there voted on what their top 3 were, and they just sort of tallied through what those top thoughts were. And then from there, then the members provided project or actions they'd like to see taken as part of this project and moving forward, and then ended on a note of what's Dublin's greatest asset. So providing some thoughts about what makes Dublin great and why we all like to work here or live here, as the case may be. So that exercise was done, as I mentioned, as part of the joint work session. There was also a steering committee meeting that was held then on Tuesday. They were led through that same exercise, and then all the division heads and departments that are engaged in the community plan update also went through that same exercise. So the goal was to be comparing sort of apples to apples and identifying sort of other themes or things that come together that everyone is concerned about. We also then had similar questions as part of the public meeting. It wasn't that same facilitated conversation, but we had opportunities for the public to share as well. So again, this all results in significant other work by our consultant to establish this existing conditions report, which then give us the baseline for how we're going to move forward with the plan here over the next year or so. So again, lots more to come. And I will email you all. We had a nice flyer that has the community plan website as well as the community questionnaire that's available. And then there's a map.social. So you can basically create your own map and make comments and things related to the city that you can each make your own. And that gets provided to our consultant team as part of this info gathering stage. So I'll email you all that because I feel like that's really nice. And then you could share it out with anyone that you know. So because we've had great response. So as of Monday, over 400 people completing that online questionnaire, which is really great. So again, want to make sure we're still putting that out there and people can provide comments. So really great opportunity. And Tuesday night's public meeting, there was a live podcast as part of that, which included a panel discussion from our city manager, Megan O'Callahan, and then our lead consultant, John Houseel, and then William Murdoch from Morpsey. So that was a nice panel discussion led by Lindsay Weisenauer and Bruce Edwards, which are CPI staff members. Lindsay's the director of that department. So it was really fun, engaging. Like they asked some different questions and they provided different feedback. The audience really seemed to enjoy that part. And then, so that was the introduction to then the public input and engagement part, but that's available on the city website as well. It was a really good, it would get you all pumped up for the community plan. So I'd encourage you to listen to that. So any other questions about that? Great. Well, thank you all again.
And with that, I'm good. You get it. Adjourned.